To ban a popular social media app on state-owned and used devices has cleared another hurdle in the General Assembly.
The full Senate passed a bill to keep TikTok off computers, phones, tablets, and other devices. WKYT's Phil Pendleton reports from Frankfort.
A week after a Chinese spy balloon was shot down over the Atlantic Ocean, the Kentucky State Senate has voted unanimously to advance a bill that would keep a Chinese company-owned app off of state devices. The bill now goes to the House.
TikTok is a social media network service owned by the Chinese company ByteDance.
Senator Robbie Mills says most tech companies are owned at least partially by the Chinese government, and that it's been widely reported that TikTok is able to access a lot of private data. There is concern that the Chinese government would have a lot of access to that. He says the FBI has said TikTok does carry a national security concern.
The FBI has warned that Chinese could use this app to influence users or control their devices.
And while there has been a lot said about the Chinese spy balloon, Senate President Robert Stivers says he doesn't think that necessarily influenced today's vote. He says there have been discussions about this going on for quite some time because of data mining. In Frankfort, Phil Pendleton, WKYT.
And that bill now goes to the full House.